Hey, welcome back. It's Sarah from Roadworthy. So I'm back home. I have mixed feelings. Re-entry has been hard. I so love getting around the country and being in places that are so different from where I live. But when I was on the road, I was feeling like it's time to go back. And now that I'm back, I'm like, oh, sad that I'm back. Well, anyway, here I am. I have been finding random footage on my phone of things that I filmed, and I was like, oh yeah, I did want to share that. So you'll probably start to see some random footage of various places, and you're like, what is she doing? So just go with it. And then pretty soon it'll be raining here, and you'll be like, wow, she's so tan. So just, don't worry about it. I wanted to catch you up. I did sort of read a lot, sort of my last week on the road, and I kind of just wanted to quickly catch myself up, in what I read. So the first thing I read, which I think I alluded to in the last video, was Giants of the Earth by O.E. Rolvaag. So this is an interesting book. So this was published in 1927 in Minnesota, but it was published in Norwegian. So Rolvaag is a Norwegian immigrant, and he actually was came from a fishing village in Norway, and realized, in his late teens, he didn't like fishing. So he begged his uncle, who lived in the Dakota Territory, please pay for me to come out to America and work on the farm, which he did. And he, kind of within a year realized he didn't want to farm either. And so he was like 20 years old or something, and started to go to the local school to learn English. Went to St. Olaf College for like 2 years, went to Norway for 1 year of schooling, and then came back to St. Olaf College to be a professor. So very much an autodidact. But he wrote this book about Norwegians emigrating to the Dakota Territory and farming, and very much based on his own experiences, his uncle's experiences, as well as his wife's family's experiences. I sort of heard this book described as like, one of the classics of American pioneer life. It just is an odd story. He wrote in Norwegian, and his books were very popular in Norway. And then he and a group of friends translated it into English. So a little bit of a wonky publishing story, but again, it's about Norwegian pioneers in 1877 Dakota Territory. So it's very episodic. Like, we went out, here we are emigrating, here we are establishing the farm. It's summer, now it's fall, it's winter, it's spring, it's summer, and here's all the trials and tribulations of being a pioneer. But it's definitely the hardships, right? The isolation, the poverty, the harsh winter, the wind, locusts, and then, but it's also a lot of the joy, like, seeing the fruits of your labor, and that camaraderie with your neighbors and your community of like, we're all struggling together and we all help one another get through. And so, you know, yes, there's, again, the hardships, but again, a lot of joy in this book. I don't want to give the impression that it's all plot, because the thing that really most surprised me about this book was a lot of descriptions of the psychology and mental illness. So Per Hansa is our main character, and his wife, Berit, clearly becomes depressed and really struggles with the isolation, the dark, the winters. Totally identify. And Per Hansa is a lot struggling with he's enjoying the pioneer experience. He's finding fulfillment. For him, the winter is a time to rest and start to plan, what am I going to do in the spring? What am I going to do in the summer? You know, so, and then he's also seeing the impact on his wife and feeling guilty, but feeling pressured. How do I bring her out of this? How do I support her? I think that, so the thing that just really, really surprised me for a book written in 1927, this was surprising. Its portrayal of mental illness and sort of the psychological impact of being a pioneer. Then I listened to Callendar Square, which was the second Charlotte and Thomas Pitt book in by Anne Perry. This is again a historic mystery in the Victorian period. You know, I enjoyed this one too. Very much about class and privilege. And again, I really like this series because it's much more about Victorian society than mystery. You know, there's a mystery thrown in with this larger narrative. I think there's like 1,000 books in this series. I don't know how long I'll go on for, but you know, I'm enjoying it. And as an audiobook, it was pleasant, you know, to listen to for hours on end while driving. Then I listened to Sing Backwards and Weep, which is Mark Lanegan's autobiography. Mark Lanegan is probably most well known for being lead singer of the Screaming Trees, but he also had a solo career and also had some other musical projects. This book really starts with his childhood briefly in Ellensburg, Washington, and him becoming a musician and becoming a drug addict in the late 80s, early 90s, up until when he goes into treatment in, I think it's the late 90s. Anyway, it sounded interesting to me, mostly because he, being from Washington State, also sort of being on the periphery of, you know, the whole Seattle grunge thing. I was just sort of curious. He really talks about his challenges with drugs and alcohol really started when he was like a 12-year-old kid. He had very neglectful parents. It's a very strange childhood, but there's a lot in here about alcoholism crack addiction, heroin addiction, stuff with mental illness, depression, anxiety, a lot with like violence, like really promiscuous and risky sexual behavior. And there's so many things in this book where you're like, stop, don't do that. So, you're rooting for him, it's just, it's tough to read. What I like is, of course, he's written this several years later. He's clearly had time to reflect, time to grow. He definitely has a lot of insight into his own behaviors. So that I think helps make it interesting. The Seattle music scene in the late 80s was not very big. And the music scene in Seattle for drug addicts was even smaller. The most famous person he was friends with is Kurt Cobain. But he writes about these relationships and these friendships. It's not very name-droppy. It's very him reflecting on what he brought to the relationship at the time and how he feels about it. He has a tremendous amount of guilt over Kurt Cobain's death and what he perceives as his role in it. So, I thought it was sensitively written about, and again, like, it didn't feel gratuitous or name-droppy. Where I got frustrated with this book was it does end with him going into recovery. And there's nothing about his recovery journey, which clearly his recovery journey was likely just as interesting as his journey into addiction. He's clearly had a lot of therapy, clearly a lot of self-reflection, and it would have been kind of interesting to hear some of that. But then again, I can also appreciate him feeling like that's a little too personal and maybe a little too close to where he still was at the time that this book was being written. I can also be his publisher being like, oh, nobody wants to hear about that. They just want to hear the sordid details of your addiction. I don't know. It also would have been interesting how he came to write a memoir. Doing some Googling, I found out that he was friends with Anthony Bourdain, and Anthony Bourdain is the one who actually encouraged him to write this memoir. There is absolutely nothing about that in this book. He reads the audiobook, and he just has this very deep voice. It's lovely to listen to. I found this pretty compulsively readable, a little bit like watching a train wreck. His descent into addiction, homelessness, is frustrating to listen to. And it's also incredibly frustrating to see the behavior of people around him. How they sort of just washed their hands or looked the other way, when clearly he had a very serious problem. I read A Little Luck by Claudia Pineiro. I really enjoyed Elena Knows, and so when I saw that Charcoal Press was putting out another book of hers, I was very curious to read it. So although it was published and translated by Francis Riddle this year, the book was actually written in 2015 and published in Argentina at that time. A very similar style, tone as Elena knows. This is a book about our main character, Mary Lohan, who is in Boston, and she's going back to Argentina for the first time in like 20 years or something like that. And as the book unfolds, you discover why she hasn't been back to Argentina, sort of what she's been escaping from all these years. I'll say absolutely zero more about it than that. Because I think how it's revealed is actually one of the things that Pineiro does really, really well. But at the beginning, she alludes to having been married in Argentina and subsequently having a relationship with an American while she's in Boston. And she writes about those two relationships. She writes about love and marriage and motherhood in very pessimistic ways. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. But, you know, definitely some very feminist viewpoints. You know, she definitely has this perspective that women are sacrificing themselves for their husband, for their children, for, you know, families, and to sort of maintain social order. Yeah, sort of like Elena knows, you know, there's definitely quite a bit of social commentary in this book. The last thing I have to catch you up on is Will and Testament by Vigdis Hjorth. Another Norwegian book. It's completely random. I don't have written down the translator. Shame on me. I will leave the name of the translator in the description box below. This starts off with a family squabble over two vacation cabins that parents are leaving to two of their four children. Very quickly, you see that this squabble about these vacation cabins really is a part of a larger issue in this family. And as the argument, the squabble goes on, you are brought into more and more of the history of this family and you know, some of the undercurrents. I think what is so fantastic about this book, I thought this book was fantastic, is you really see the hurt, the bitterness, the anger that all of these characters have, and how they all feel justified in their perspective. And as a reader, you kind of get where they're all coming from. You kind of get why, oh yeah, I can see why you felt like as parents it made sense to leave these cabins to only two of your children. Like, okay, I get it, you know. But then of course you can see the perspective from the two children who didn't get left the cabins. Why'd they be pissed, you know? At the center is sort of the oldest daughter and the father have this complicated relationship. And you see how it spills over other relationships in the family. So the spousal relationship, but also the relationship amongst the siblings, how the grandchildren get roped in. What I thought was so brilliant about this book is, again, you really do see everybody's perspective. All these characters are very nuanced. No one feels, it's very hard to pick a side. Everybody feels justified, but also everybody feels completely unreasonable. So it's a messy, messy family drama, and it really felt true to life. I'm very interested in reading Hjorth's other books. So, all right, well, that's it. So I will go ahead and let you go and chat next week. Okay.